Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming, and good afternoon. I am Elaine Sandler. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce you to Rabbi Isaac Jeret, who will introduce Vice Premier Moshe Yaalon. Mr. Yaalon will speak and then respond to questions from Rabbi Jeret. We will then take questions directly from the audience later in the program. For 7 years, Rabbi Jeret has been the spiritual leader of Congregation Ner Tamid Synagogue in Palos Verdes Peninsula in Los Angeles. He is an acknowledged leader and is known nationally for his public advocacy in support of common concerns between the United States and the State of Israel. He is a dynamic speaker and prolific writer. He leads a congregation that shares in each other's joys and comforts one another in their sorrows. He was a professional singer as a child and a songwriter as a young adult, and brings an unusual range of capabilities and skills to his inspirational rabbinic leadership. Rabbi Jeret is on the board of many influential organizations. He served as the past president of the Israel Christian Nexus, whose role is to bring together and connect Christians and Jews in support of Israel and to honor our shared Judeo-Christian heritage. Rabbi Jeret is the national vice president of the FIDF, Friends of the Israel Defense Forces, an organization that serves the welfare of the young men and women defending the state of Israel, which includes providing support for the families of fallen soldiers. Rabbi Jeret's longstanding relationship with Vice Premier Yaalon began through his work with the FIDF and Paepcke. It is my pleasure to welcome Rabbi Isaac Jeret.
Thank you, Elaine. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to what promises to be a most extraordinary event. We are honored this afternoon to host the State of Israel's Vice Premier and Minister of Strategic Affairs, Lieutenant General Moshe Yaalon. Before I introduce the Vice Premier, however, I'd like to acknowledge several individuals and offer some very brief introductory remarks. First and foremost, I want to thank the Coalition for an Enduring Peace in the Middle East, an Aspen-based organization, for hosting this afternoon's event. In particular, I want to acknowledge Elaine Sandler for her Herculean efforts organizing and coordinating this event. Elaine, personally, on behalf of all present this afternoon, I want to thank you for all of your hard work. Thank you, Elaine. As well, I want to thank Alan Altman and Melanie Sturm for their vision, their efforts on behalf of today's event. And finally, I want to acknowledge all of the numerous volunteers. You're among us today. You have been staffing today, and in advance of this event, you've all helped to make today's event a success. I thank you, and we all thank you for your efforts. Today's address by Vice Premier Yaalon will focus upon challenges facing Israel in a changing Middle East. Before we begin, however, let's take a step back. Let's place Israel into context for us as Americans. Let's look at Israel from a place of its values, its interests, and our own, considering how they reside in and flow from the Middle East. When we welcome a leader of Israel, a statesman of Israel, we welcome our friend. We welcome our friend to our home. As a preliminary matter of courtesy, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to please make sure that your cell phones, your PDAs, are turned off, or at least turned to silent mode. And as you're doing that right now, please, I want you to consider that your text messaging, your instant messaging, and many other technologies inside your cell phone come from Israel itself, along with numerous other technologies that we enjoy every day, some of them right here in this wonderful auditorium. We in America are blessed. We champion civil liberties. They are the hallmark of our legal institutions. They are the bedrock, the foundation of our society. Consider by way of introduction this afternoon that Israel is the one true democracy in the Middle East. It's the one country in the Middle East where women enjoy rights similar to those to which they're entitled in our own country. It's the one country in the Middle East in which Muslims vote in free elections, serve as representatives in a free and meaningful parliament, and serve as judges in a meaningful judiciary. It's the only country in the Middle East in which gays and lesbians can live who they are freely. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, many people don't know this, but often gays and lesbians flee Palestinian territories to Israel for refuge. Consider that the only two countries in the world that took in Vietnamese refugees, commonly referred to as Vietnamese boat people, in the 1970s were our own country and the much maligned State of Israel, something that we often don't consider. And then finally consider the following. In Israel, one finds the Jewish homeland, the Jewish people returning to their homeland after 3,000 years of wandering around the world, but while they lived nonetheless in that homeland consistently throughout those 3,000 years, surviving persecution, nonetheless having the resilience to imagine and determine that dream of recapturing a destiny. Ladies and gentlemen, that ability to retain that dream and pursue it, that narrative and living it through, is not unlike our own. The shores of Israel and the shores of the United States give rise to a similar dream, a dream that is our own and a dream that is shared by Israel. Many Americans know only of the strategic value that Israel and the United States share together and offer to one another. But we share with Israel deep-rooted values that undergird the strategic value and concerns that we offer to one another. We protect and preserve what we value and share together. That's why today matters. Now, let me share with you the plan for this afternoon. The Vice Premier will address us for 20 to 25 minutes. Upon the conclusion of his address, he'll be seated, and I'll share with him 4 questions. Subsequently, we will invite live questions. Questions should be honest, direct, and challenging. The Vice Premier would appreciate nothing less than an honest dialogue. Questions, however, should always be respectful. We've invited the Vice Premier into our own home. As a courtesy to one another, all questions should be asked within 45 seconds, and they should conclude with a question mark. It is now my great honor, ladies and gentlemen, to introduce to you my friend, our guest, Israel's Vice Premier and Minister of Strategic Affairs, Lieutenant General Moshe Yaalon. Vice Premier Moshe Yaalon served as the 17th Chief of Staff of the Israel Defense Forces from 2002 to 2005. During his term, Lieutenant General Yaalon led the Army's successful effort to quell the Palestinian terror war launched against Israel in September of 2000. Lieutenant General Yaalon's mandatory army service began in 1968 in the Nachal Paratroop Regiment. After serving as a reserve soldier in the 1973 Yom Kippur War, Lieutenant General Yaalon returned to active duty and completed officers' training. He held several command positions in the IDF Paratroop Brigade and was wounded in combat at the end of the 1982 Lebanon War. He climbed through the IDF ranks to serve as the head of military intelligence and was appointed Chief of Staff on July 9, 2002. At the end of 2005, Lieutenant General Yaalon spent 9 months in Washington, D.C. as a distinguished military fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. From 2006 to 2008, he held positions as a distinguished fellow at Jerusalem's Shalem Center's Adelson Institute for Strategic Studies, as chairman of Beit Marashah's Center of Jewish Identity and Culture, and as president of Shekel, an organization which provides community services for people with disabilities. Vice Premier Yaalon pursued advanced studies at the Command and Staff College in Camberley, England, and holds a bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Haifa. Born in 1950 in Kiryat Chaim, the Vice Premier is married and is the proud father of 3 children. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Israel's Vice Premier, its Minister of Strategic Affairs, Lieutenant General Moshe Yaalon. Baruch haba.
Thank you, Rabbi Jeret. I didn't have the opportunity to hear your introduction, but I'm sure that it was warm and right.
True.
I would like to thank, first of all, to Rabbi Jeret and for all those who are behind organizing this event here with so nice crowd in so gorgeous place in Aspen, Colorado. So I'm glad to be here, not just because of the place, but because of the opportunity to share with you the Israeli government observations, perspective regarding the current challenges that Israel faces in the Middle East. And it is so important, as we are so experienced, to notice that the international political discourse, not talking about the international public discourse, are dominated by too many misconceptions regarding the challenges. I don't like to call it problems. We don't have problems. We have challenges in the state of Israel. So I'm here using this opportunity to share with you our observations. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and shalom. Israel finds itself today in the middle of a huge volcano eruption in the Middle East, whose lava brought to the surface new groups, many of which were not really known by almost anybody until the end of last year. We who live in the only democracy in the area, in the very tough neighborhood, namely the Middle East, watch with appreciation and amazement the young Arab generation in the region, who in spite of living under autocracies ever since they were born, and in spite of brutal repression in some cases, are courageous enough to go out to the streets and demonstrate peacefully in demand for their basic rights of freedom, democracy, and equal opportunities. We in Israel realize that our capability to have an impact on the way this volcanic eruption will end up is limited. We condemn the brutality with which repressive regimes like Iran and Syria treat their citizens and wish our neighbors success in their quest for democracy and happiness. At the same time, we are quite concerned that radical forces will be the main benefactors of the new situation and will take advantage of democratic reforms to gain power. We are also wondering how long this process is going to take and whether the primordial sentiments that surfaced during this upheaval will cause changes in the map of the area. Several lessons are already clear. A, the public is not intimidated anymore by the repressive and corrupt regimes, and therefore the chances of Assad to stay in power are low. B, monarchies are better equipped to cope with internal difficulties rather than the republics. C, the real state powers in the Middle East right now are Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. Though it's logical to assume that Egypt will return and play a major role soon. D, economic considerations will play a crucial role in determining the way the situation is going to unravel. E, while large segments of the population are interested in real reform, the bigger part of the public has radical Islamic and nationalistic opinions engraved in their minds, and with the lack of a vibrant civil society and a thriving middle class, there is a bigger chance that in the end of the day, we shall witness a Middle East that is more radical and more hostile towards the liberal democracies of the West than a region enjoying a spring of democracy and a bright future of cooperation with the West. From an Israeli point of view, it's worth pointing out one other lesson. As we were saying for decades, it's now clear that the main problems that concern the Arabs are not the relations with Israel or the Palestinian issue, but their own problematic regimes that deprive them from their liberties, their economic and social miseries, and the Iranian threat as well. While we watch this ongoing revolution, Israel continues to face, as we did so many times in our history, a wide-ranging set of threats and challenges. The first of them is the growing effort of the radical Islamist camp to create a new world order where political Islam will play a leading role. This camp is comprised of two groups, which at the same time compete and cooperate with each other. The first one is led by Iran and includes its Shia proxy Hezbollah and notorious Sunni Palestinian Islamist terror groups like Hamas and Islamic Jihad. It receives extensive support from Syria. This camp uses the struggle against Israel as a major engine for promoting its strategic goals of gaining regional and global power. The members of this coalition continue to accumulate unprecedented capabilities to strike Israeli civilians with long-range rockets and missiles. But they don't stop at that. The Iranians are involved in every internal conflict in the region and are directly supporting the terror groups that operate against the US and European forces in the Middle East, including Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and Shiite forces in Iraq. Of course, their most dangerous endeavor is the attempt to acquire nuclear weapons. This effort has led them already to a point where they have enriched more than 4 tons of uranium to 3.5% and more than 60 kilograms to 20%, which is 80% of the way to 90% enrichment necessary for military purposes. These amounts of enriched uranium are sufficient after further enrichment for about 3 nuclear bombs. Iran has declared its intention to triple the pace of enrichment to 20% and move advanced centrifuges to the highly protected facility which they tried to hide until last year at Qom. The sanctions and technological obstacles have managed to slow down the project, but we have to admit, after more than a year, that they are not able to stop it so far. The Iranians are determined to reach their goal, and when they analyze the reluctance of the international community to confront them, they believe that with enough patience, they will be able to reach their goal, namely to become nuclear. Once they do it, they are going to be able to become a regional superpower and destabilize the Gulf states and maybe demand a permanent seat on the Security Council. They will also cause a terrible embarrassment to the US as the leader of the free world who is committed to preventing them from having the capability to produce nuclear weapons. They will make a mockery of the NPT regime and will start a very dangerous nuclear arms race in the region. In short, if this dangerous regime that calls repeatedly to the destruction of the State of Israel is not stopped soon, there is going to be a catastrophe. The international community can't afford to allow this non-conventional regime to develop or procure such non-conventional weapons. Ahmadinejad and his regime had to face a dilemma: the bomb or survival. I have no doubt that this is achievable if we join together to impose real isolation and crippling sanctions on the regime, offer moral support for the freedom movement, the Green Movement, and other opposition organizations inside Iran, and project a credible military option. I'm convinced that if the regime is presented with this dilemma, it will choose survivability over the bomb. But this can only happen if standing fast and holding onto its nuclear program becomes unsustainable, costly, and potentially suicidal for Iran. The second group of radical Islamists consists of Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and their affiliates. They prefer to focus directly on the great Satan, America. We are lucky to be the minor Satan. As a champion of all Western power and its presence in the Middle East. In spite of the formidable achievement of getting rid of Osama bin Laden, the radical Islamic terrorist groups still constitutes a considerable challenge. The success of these extremists is largely a result of the asymmetry of modern warfare. The free world needs to adopt a strategy that leads to victory. In the most comprehensive meaning of the word victory. But radical groups need only to play, not to lose, which makes it much easier for them to succeed. And so far, they are being successful. We can see their success in the intensified efforts of Western countries to minimize their presence and influence in the Middle East, engage the radicals and avoid confronting radical Islam, not even calling it by name. Against this backdrop, radical and radicalizing states like Iran and Turkey today, together with foreign powers like Russia, are already busy filling the regional void being created as the West withdraws, taking advantage of the weakness of most Arab states to expand their sphere of influence. The strategic threat posed by radical Islam is one that profoundly threatens the very core of liberal civilization, basic human rights, the rights of women and other minorities, and religious freedoms. They are ideologically opposed to the concept of civil liberties that we all take for granted. The second challenge is the ongoing assault on Israel's legitimacy and the effort to dehumanize Israelis in the international arena. This attitude is self-evident in much of the diplomatic world and certain quarters of the media and academy, and endemic to NGOs which control the discourse of human rights and abuse it to attack Israel. The flawed and biased Goldstone report and the predictable reaction of some to the Mavi Marmara flotilla incident last year are perfect examples of this double standard to which Israel is constantly held. Even more worrying is that this assault on Israel's legitimacy was shifting in the last couple of years from the fringes of the political spectrum to its center, all thanks to an unholy alliance between extreme Islamists, Arab nationalists, and naive and radical liberals in the West. Recent attempts to further delegitimize Israel, such as the second flotilla, the flotilla, and the marches on Israel borders on the Nakba and Naksa days, as the Arabs call it, have failed due to the understanding of Western democracies, of the dangers that these groups pose to the international world order, to peace and stability, and thanks to a better preparations on the Israeli side. This may indicate a change in the direction of this battle, but it is far from being over. In this context, it is important that we don't let the delegitimizers enjoy any successes or help them in their efforts to create more troubles. We should not let the Palestinians have a unilaterally imposed state that, as Abu Mazen himself wrote in the New York Times, will only serve to enhance the Palestinian delegitimization campaign and may cause escalation on the ground. At the same time, we should insist on demanding Turkey to accept the result of the Palmer Committee and admit that the naval blockade on Gaza, declared to prevent the entry of weapons to the ruling terror organization Hamas, was legal and justified, and make sure we do not apologize for acts we took as self-defense. This delegitimization campaign leads me to the third challenge, which is grounded in the false claims of the delegitimizers. I'm talking about the paradigm many people have adopted regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which is totally based on the Palestinian export narrative that is presented to the outside, namely to the West, to non-Arabic speaking world. According to this paradigm, the conflict is simply about territory and can therefore be solved easily. The only reason the conflict endures is Israeli intransigence and settlement activity. And so the Israelis should be forced to make concessions and withdraw to more or less the June 1967 lines. Otherwise, the two-state solution will vanish. In this paradigm, since the injustice of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is responsible for the Muslims not getting along with the West, it is Israeli policy that stands in the way of the great long overdue reconciliation between East and West. Ladies and gentlemen, the only problem is that this old paradigm is false, and the fact that some have accepted it explains precisely why we are stuck at a dead end. Israel wants peace. Israel yearns for peace. and Israel was ready to make concessions and take risks for peace. But this dispute is not really just about land. The problem is that the real Palestinian narrative, the one served up for domestic consumption in Arabic, totally rejects Israel's right to exist peacefully, and especially as a free and democratic nation state of the Jewish people. This internal Palestinian narrative tells that the struggle against Israel didn't begin after 1967, but it actually began with the dawn of Zionism, and it is about Israel's right to exist in any borders. In other words, it is not about 67, but about 48. And this struggle continues today, even if its form sometimes changes, depending on the circumstances. Since the Palestinians consider the terror campaign known as the Second Intifada, or Al-Aqsa Intifada, as a severe setback, they have little appetite for repetition of this kind of conflict. Instead, they focus today on what they call political and popular resistance, but are better termed delegitimization and soft violence that is led by ultra-radical Western and Israeli leftist movements as well. Time and time again, the official Palestinian Authority television broadcasts catchy songs that call for Israel to disappear and for the Palestinians to control all of Palestine, including Haifa, Jaffa, Acre, and so forth. In one of these songs, the dancers swing the rifles and sing, "Oh, our revolution, my weapon has emerged. There is no force in the world that can remove the weapon from my hand. He who offers his blood doesn't care if his blood flows upon the ground." On another song that was performed recently in front of Abu Mazen and many of his colleagues in the Palestinian leadership, the singer promises that Haifa will be a part of Palestine, and the audience claps their hands in joy. These kind of programs, which are reflected also in the Palestinian textbooks, in the Palestinian educational curriculum, the media, and the leaders' messages for domestic consumption, continue to promote the belief that the very existence of Israel is illegitimate and glorify violence against Israelis. As long as there is no real focus, no real pressure on the Palestinians to end their incitement toward Israel and the Jews, as long as they continue to glorify terrorists and don't educate their people for peace, they still educate their kids from kindergarten to wear explosive belts and to glorify the homicide bombers as role models. There is no reason to believe that a solution will be found. As long as the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, led by Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, who is considered in the West as the moderate leader, is not ready to recognize Israel's right to exist as a nation state of the Jewish people, denying the existence of the Jewish people, there can be no chance for real and lasting peace. This true paradigm that explains correctly the nature of the conflict is now gaining ground. The old false paradigm still exists, but much more support is given today to the understanding that any agreement should lead to two states for two peoples, Israel as a nation state of the Jewish people, and Palestine as a nation state of the Palestinians with mutual recognition. President Obama expressed this idea in his May 19th speech, and the French foreign minister repeated this message recently in Spain. We are now approaching an important junction on the Palestinian track, as the Palestinian Authority is working hard to portray Israel as an obstacle to peace, using a set of preconditions as an excuse not to negotiate, and blaming Israel for the fact that the talks are stalled. Their goal is to force a solution in the form of a Security Council resolution that establishes a Palestinian state along the 67 lines and accepting it as a member of the United Nations, or a General Assembly resolution that will accept them as an observer state without the Palestinians even having to recognize Israel's right to exist as a nation state of the Jewish people, or taking the necessary steps to provide security and fight terror. Where does Israel stand on this issue? As I said, Israelis want peace more than anybody else, since after all, we live right in the middle of this volatile region and function as a target for much of the violence, as the vast majority of Israelis have experienced war. But we also realize that achieving a stable and lasting peace, a real peace, is not an easy task. It's never been easy, and it never will be. That's why we understand that, like in many other cases, the longer way is actually the shorter one. From day one of the current government, Prime Minister Netanyahu made it clear that we have no interest in governing the Palestinians. It's not in our national interest. In his policy speech at Bar-Ilan University in June 2009, and in his speech in front of the Congress in May this year, the Prime Minister accepted the principle of the two states for two peoples and called for direct negotiations to achieve this objective. Hundreds of roadblocks, checkpoints, and barriers have already been removed in the last 2 years. Not an insignificant matter from a security perspective, I can assure you. But as we enjoy a relatively calm situation, security-wise, we can make it. Our government also implemented an unprecedented, to use Secretary of State Clinton's language, 10 months moratorium on settlement construction in Judea and Samaria, in the West Bank. What did we get in return from the Palestinians? Just their standard, predictable answer. They responded with a resounding and categorical no, piling on preconditions which had never existed during 17 years of prior negotiations. Peace can't be made by walking away from the table or by insisting on dictating the outcome of negotiations before they even commence. Peace is only made sitting around the table, putting forth all issues under dispute, and working hard to find mutually acceptable solutions. Therefore, we appreciate the U.S. clear intention to vote against a possible unilateral Palestinian request for UN membership and call upon more everybody who is interested in stable peace and in avoiding the potential escalation and the embarrassment of the Palestinian Authority leadership, as nothing is going to change on the ground, to declare that they will not support the Palestinian unilateral step. After all this, it's just a hollow threat that at the utmost can provide the Palestinians with an empty declaratory resolution that has no practical meaning. Everybody, including the Palestinians themselves, will be better off if the Palestinians will prefer the avenue of negotiations. At the same time, it's high time for the Palestinian Authority to end the incitement once and for all, and begin educating for peace, building a culture of peace, and establishing accountable institutions that enable real governance, economic development, and a real sustained effort to fight terror against Israel. We have seen some progress in this last regard, but it's been focused on maintaining domestic law and order. It's time for the Palestinian Authority to stop making heroes out of suicide bombers and educating children to hate, and instead start educating and preparing their people for peace, coexistence, and reconciliation with Israel. They need to accept the two states for two peoples formula, not just two states. They claim that there is no Jewish people. They claim that Judaism is a religion, but neither a nationality nor a peoplehood. So why should a religion have a state, they claim? They hope that eventually Israel will also become a Palestinian state. The current government has reaffirmed the notion that respect for Israel's vital security requirements is a path that must be traveled if we are to achieve a viable and durable peace with our Palestinian neighbors. That means defensible borders, a demilitarized Palestinian entity, control of a unified airspace over Judea and Samaria, electromagnetic security and international security guarantees. Ensuring a security-first approach provides the only avenue to real peace. The Palestinians have to understand and internalize that just as we recognize the Palestinian right to a nation-state or self-determination, so much they recognize the same right of the Jewish people. Any peace treaty will have to entail the end of all claims from either side, and not just the historical claims, as Abu Mazen says. We are talking about categorically renouncing the option of return for Palestinian refugees from 1948 into Israel, and recognizing the right of the Jewish people to live in peace and security in their nation state. We are ready for peace. Are they? One more point. We are ready and willing to move forward in the peace process with Chairman Mahmoud Abbas right away. But given the agreement he signed with Hamas, a terror organization that calls for the destruction of Israel through violent means, we expect him to either give up this agreement or convince Hamas to accept the quartet conditions before negotiations can commence. From an Israeli point of view, in spite of the magnitude of the challenges before us, I am rather optimistic. I believe that Israel and the Jewish people, together with allies such as the United States, are capable of confronting these challenges. This will require deep mutual understanding and empathy from and for both sides. This will require clarity, clear understanding of the challenges ahead of us, moral clarity, and clear strategy to meet these challenges. We need to continue our intensive dialogue with an even greater readiness to listen to each other and to understand and respect each other's rationale and concerns. My confidence in our future also comes from the inspiration given to me by the people of Israel, and especially our soldiers. Knowing them very well after 37 years of military service, I am encouraged by them. What this young democracy has accomplished in just 63 years in science, in technology, in medicine, in agriculture, in the arts, is nothing short of a miracle. We may be small, but our cause is just. And our strength and resilience derive from our conviction that we are right, that we have the right to live in peace and security in a democratic nation state of the Jewish people. Our democratic nature is represented these days in a wave of demonstrations regarding economic and social issues in Israel. Regardless of my opinion on the specific topics, I am proud to see the way our civil society, youngsters as well as adults, are expressing their protests. Now, more than ever, I believe that the free countries of the world must stand together. We have an honorable and worthy cause to defend. Israel may be on the front lines, but the scope and global character of the threat we face is now apparent to us all. We have to face these challenges together. Thank you.
יישר כוח. Thank you very much, Moshe. Thank you so much. You did mention the word dispute in relation to the things that need to be put on the table between Palestinians and the State of Israel in negotiation. It seems that for many, it is a foregone conclusion that Israel occupies Palestinian land. And it seems very clear that in Palestinian media, textbooks, education, there is a desire to take all of Israel. In fact, of course, there has never been a Palestinian state. The Palestinian national movement existed initially to vanquish the State of Israel. And at best, Palestinian Arabs are arguing over lands over which it is in legal dispute with Israel, meaning the disputed territories of the West Bank at this point, or Judea and Samaria. Are these lands legally disputed? Are these lands legally occupied? When you speak of two states, the nation state of the Jewish people, the nation state of the Palestinian people, is this giving back land, giving away land? Is it about Israel's national interest or what's rightfully the Palestinians? And can you clarify for all of us what the future would hold in such an arrangement and what it would mean?
You know probably that the idea of the Jewish homeland came out politically by the Balfour Declaration. It was approved by the Nations of League, by the UN resolutions calling for a Jewish homeland. At the beginning, even east of the Jordan River, later on west of the Jordan River, namely the land of Israel, from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River. That was a British mandate role to allow a Jewish homeland. As a result of Arab resistance, or to be more precise, rejectionism to the Zionist idea to create a Jewish state in this piece of land, and using violence against the Brits as well as against the Jews in the land of Israel from the beginning of the 20th century, or even earlier, in a way. The British mandate decided to divide this piece of land, which was promised to the Jews as a Jewish homeland, at least west of the Jordan River. And the first idea to divide the land came out in the 30s with the Peel Commission. And when the Peel Commission was nominated, summer 36, the Arabs started what they called the Great Arab Rebellion, namely waging a war against the Jews and the Brits. At the end, the Peel Commission proposal claimed to divide the land of Israel. This partition plan proposal was accepted by the Jewish leadership, rejected by the Arab leadership. Later on, it was the UN partition plan proposal, 29th of November 47, against the Arab pressure in the international arena to divide this piece of land which was promised to us as a Jewish homeland. And again, the Jewish leadership accepted the UN partition plan proposal, the UN resolution 1881, and it was rejected by the Arabs. And again, what was the Arab reaction? Violence. We call it our independence war. Started on the day after the UN resolution. They call it the Nakba, the catastrophe. In 2000, it was an Israeli partition plan proposal, led by Prime Minister Barak in Camp David. Arafat was not ready to negotiate this proposal. And again, as consistently, he waged a war. As they call it Al-Aqsa Intifada, I call it the Homicide Bombers War, September 2000. With this in mind, we should realize that Till now, we don't have a partner even to any kind of territorial compromise in the land of Israel, and it should be well understood and well understood. But this piece of land, which we are ready to give them, to allow them the self-governance in whatever political concept, whatever political entity, as we don't want to govern them. It is not occupied territory. This is disputed land, which we are ready to give up. We can't ignore demography. So with this in mind, we tried very hard from the very beginning of our term to say very clearly, as we don't want to govern them, we want them to have their political independence, and actually, they enjoy already political independence. But instead of having one political entity, they have two already. One in Gaza, led by Hamas, we call it Hamastan, very hostile entity. We can't negotiate with them. The relationship is very clear. We have to deter them from provoking rockets today, to launch another rocket. And we have to respond, to deter them. But let's leave it alone. We have a Palestinian leadership in Ramallah, led by Mahmoud Abbas. We are ready to make progress in any formula which will allow them to be a reliable, accountable, responsible partner. First of all, to rule themselves. And they have their own responsibilities. They have their own government too, already, as I said. Parliament, municipalities. We don't want to govern them. And we claimed from the very beginning that in order to deal with this conflict is not just to talk about Israeli concessions. And the lessons that we learned from Oslo are very clear. Oslo actually was what we call a top-down process. Leaders met each other, shook hands, photo op, conferences. They even signed agreements which were violated from day one of the implementation of Oslo. By Arafat, from day one. I know what I'm talking about. I was head of the intelligence under late Mr. Rabin in the peak of Oslo. But the process was not backed from the bottom up. So we say very clearly, we are ready to assist you, the Palestinians, to improve your competence in governing themselves, improving governance, to have reliable political institutions, judicial system, whatever, to improve the law and order, security, the economy. This is not a viable entity when it comes to the economy. They need the donations from the West, from Arab countries. This is the most supported entity, political entity, in terms of finance per capita. And we claim that in order to have a viable economy in Nablus, in Ramallah, the economy should be generated from the bottom up to encourage business making, creating jobs, industrial zones, whatever. Our President Peres said about it very clearly, that the way that the West is financing the Palestinian Authority is a corrupt and ineffective way. It's like taking the money from the poor people of the rich countries and giving it to the rich people of the poor countries. Who does enjoy it? The widow of Arafat, the sons of Abu Mazen, the sons of Abu Alan, the warlords. And we do care, as Israelis, as Jews, about the ordinary Arab who lives in Nablus. It is according to our values as well as our interests that he will live in dignity and will enjoy well-being. But, you know, they have all the options, and they are corrupt, and they prefer to be dependent on the West. Weakness has become a precious asset in the Middle East. You are weak, so you can deny accountability. This is Abu Mazen. But on top of any bottom-up process is education, as I mentioned. Without dealing with it, any signed document is going to be useless, even dangerous. As we witnessed in 2000, with all the Oslo process, with all the nice ideas, Arafat, from the very beginning, I claimed in 1995 as head of the intelligence, It didn't change the educational curriculum of the Palestinian youngsters in a way to prepare them for coexistence and reconciliation in the state of Israel. He prepared them for jihad, holy war, and istishad, to become martyrs, homicide bombers. So with this in mind, first of all, we prefer to go to a slower process. As I mentioned, the longer way is a shorter one, but we don't deal with occupied territories. This is disputed land, which we are ready to give them in order to be able to govern themselves. It doesn't mean that we are ready to go back to 67 line. It doesn't mean that we are ready to divide Jerusalem. There are other issues. First of all, we would like to see them controlling in a competent way the territories that are under their responsibility already.
I just want to make sure to clarify this. Essentially what you're saying is the bid for Palestinian statehood now, currently under consideration in September, is a bid for Palestinian statehood on disputed territories, not occupied territories.
Yes.
That's what you're suggesting.
That's right.
That is quite a commentary.
Yeah.
Quite a commentary. Thank you. The second question. In May and June, just several months ago, there was a tremendous amount of drama that unfolded regarding President Obama's truly unprecedented comments, at least from the perspective of a United States president, suggesting that there should be a reset button on Palestinian-Israeli negotiations with the foundation for border negotiations being the 67 borders, really the 1949 armistice lines, truly. And Prime Minister Netanyahu, the Netanyahu administration, took issue with this, particularly apparently because there was no concurrent demand that the Palestinians negate their right of return to what would then be Israeli sovereign lands thereafter. It appears in press reports of recent days that the Netanyahu administration is now accepting the Obama administration's 67 border formula. A, is this the case? B, if so, why is it okay now when it wasn't okay 2 months ago? Could you shed some light on this, especially in light of your presentation?
As long as I'm a member in this government, you don't have to worry about this issue.
Thank you.
But I would like to elaborate about it.
Please.
Our problem with President Obama's speech was not just about mentioning the 67 lines. It was about the sequence of the issues to be negotiated. Now, he proposed to start with territories against security arrangements. And we claim that we are ready to deal with everything, but not in this sequence. As if we have to start with territory, the Palestinians will be very happy. In this case, they have just to get and not to give anything. And this was the main mistake of Oslo. Yes. Since Oslo till now, they got territory, political independence, and many other tangible assets. What did we get in return? Terror and rockets? And till now, if they are not ready to recognize in the end of political process, they are not ready to say it even now, that in the end of any political process, they will be ready to recognize Israel's right to exist as a nation state of the Jewish people. Why should we start dealing with territories? If they are not ready to say that in any final settlement, which will be based on territorial compromise, 2 states for 2 peoples, on agreed lines, it will be considered at the end of conflict and finality of claims. They deny it. So why we should start talking about territories? To give more for what? So we rejected this sequence.
Thank you for clarifying that and offering that perspective. As you can tell, many are very appreciative to hear this. Much appreciated. In the interest of time and in the interest of ensuring that people here have an opportunity for some live questions, I'd like to turn to the audience at this time. I do understand that there's a mic that has been set up. Thank you, Alan.
Is this working? Yes.
Okay, my question is very simple. Why do you think Hamas was elected? And what can Israel do to reverse the trend? And I agree with you, education and so forth. But why did Hamas get elected?
We have to learn from this case for the future. The Israeli government at that time, led by Prime Minister Sharon, rejected the participation of Hamas in the Palestinian elections. Otherwise, they meet certain criteria. Unfortunately, because of US pressure, Hamas was allowed to participate in the elections. And they went to the ballots with the bullets. They didn't meet any criteria, which now were set up by the quartet. Using this example, we should be very cautious about the elections in Egypt. As our experience with Hamas is very clear, you allow Islamical radical movement, jihadist movement, to participate in democratic elections. They use the democratic rules of the game to gain political power and immediately to impose non-democratic regime, to kill the opposition or to throw the opposition from the 18th floor of the skyscrapers in Gaza. So it shouldn't be acceptable. When we look now to the Middle East, democracy doesn't start by elections. It's a long process. We should start again by education, to educate young generation for freedom of speech, human rights, women's rights, civil society, to create the values of civil society. It can't start by elections. And where we have to manage elections, all the parties should meet certain criteria. So it was a tremendous mistake to allow Hamas to participate in the elections.
So I want to follow up on this important question, just to take this further. If one considers what happened in Gaza and now what happened in Egypt, what would be the other way? What would it look like to take the energy that was unleashed in Egypt and not to move to elections? What would it look like to move in a different direction to achieve true democratic reform? What would it look like over time with your vision?
I'm a great supporter of democratization. I worked with well-known Nathan Sharansky on this project, approaching moderate elements in our region, pragmatists, who are ready to adopt, to embrace democratic values, and to empower them. Those elements in the Middle East should be approached by all Western countries. For us, it's quite difficult. You know, we are Israelis in a very sensitive position in the Arab street, let's say it this way. But to be approached by US organizations, European organizations, Australian, Canadian organizations, and so forth, and to deal with education, to spend money, not on paying the salaries to the Palestinians, but to spend money and to invest money in education. And on the other way, not to push any regime in the region, like the Egyptian regime today, the military, transitional regime, to go to parliamentary elections without any criteria. In this case, we might meet the Muslim Brotherhood, enjoying the majority parliament, imposing Islam, radical Islam, first of all in Egypt, and then moving east rather than to the west.
So who would govern in Egypt? In your vision, as you would have imagined it otherwise without elections, who would govern in Egypt during this educational transformation, institutional transformation toward democracy?
Any transitional regime
For a
in the
lengthy
countries,
period of time.
It might be a military regime, otherwise it will be a jihadist regime.
Fair enough.
Can we get this? With all the technology that has come out of the State of Israel, we now see the Leviathan fields. We see the potential for the ability of Israel to meet all of its energy needs and all of the energy needs of the countries around it. And of course, we've now been faced from Hezbollah and Lebanon a threat about those fields being theirs. Could you comment on that?
We are lucky to find a huge gas reservoir in the Mediterranean, to be exploited not earlier than 2013. We will enjoy it. It will supply and provide our energy needs. We will not be dependent on others, I would say. Having said that, we should enjoy it without giving up our, what we call, knowledge. Today, without natural resources, we enjoy prosperous economy based on knowledge. I would say knowledge and spirit, brains and hearts, Jewish brains and hearts. We shouldn't give up it. Now, the Lebanese, it's not the Lebanese government. Hezbollah, backed by Iran, after the revelations of the gas reservoir, decided to create a new artificial excuse for conflict with Israel. And this is about the economic boundaries, it is called in the international arena, between Lebanon and Israel. It is amazing. The Lebanese government in 2007 signed an agreement with Cyprus about the economic boundaries. And not incidentally, when we dealt with it 2 years ago, we found that the boundaries are very right, the borders are very right, and we adopted it. And we signed an agreement with Cyprus last year. Now the Lebanese, actually Hezbollah, backed by Iran, they regret the boundaries that they agreed about in 2007, and they try to change it in a way that will create conflict with us. You know, usually speaking, Hezbollah is looking for friction with us. This is the case with Shaba farms in the north, some other issues, Rajar village. You don't have to know the details, but those are examples of Hezbollah excuses to keep an ongoing conflict with Israel. Actually, the border between Israel and Lebanon has been marked by UNIFIL, by UN Institute. According to the international law, according to the international borders marked in 1922 between the Brits and the French and so forth. So it's not an issue. But Hezbollah prefers to keep some areas, disputed areas, as a reason for their existence. They need to fight Israel. They need excuses. So now they use the gas reservoirs in the Mediterranean as another issue for conflict. But I believe that we will resolve it by the UN as soon as possible.
Assume that ultimately you agree to a two-state solution. What I'd like you to comment on are three particular areas and how you deal with it. One is making Jerusalem an international city. jointly operated in some fashion so that everyone has access to all parts of it? One. Two, how do you run a Palestinian country when part of it's in Gaza and the other part's on the West Bank? Is that conceivable? Third, what do you do with the Golan? When you look from the bottom of the Golan and you see the advantage that the Syrians have at certain times during war, and the water rights that come from Jordan, and it's got to be split between Jordan, Syria, and Israel. How do you deal with sort of those three areas in coming to the two-state solution?
Regarding the Palestinians, there is no way to unify between Gaza and Judea and Samaria. And there is no way for reconciliation between Hamas and Fatah. Otherwise, it will be a facade, an artificial reconciliation. We have already independent entity in Gaza. We call it Hamastan, as I mentioned. And this is an independent political entity, so far very hostile to us. They should have an open door to the outside via Egypt, Rafah crossing point. And this is the case. Is it a viable entity? It's up to them. In Judea and Samaria and the West Bank, we have the second entity, led by Mahmoud Abbas. As I said, as I mentioned, it is already a political entity, independent one, but dependent on Israeli infrastructure, like electricity, water, dependent on the Israeli economy. Their currency is a shekel. The taxes, we take it, and we give them money. So it is not a viable entity. Having said that, they can live with it, we can live with it, unless their intention is not to settle the conflict, unless their intention is not to enjoy well-being, but to fight us in a zero-sum game, as they perceive it now. I'm talking about the moderates in Ramallah. For them, it is a zero-sum game. Occupation started in 1948, not in 1967. There is no room for a Jewish state. They try to make it by political means, as I mentioned, delegitimization, and so forth. But we are ready to allow them to live in dignity, to enjoy well-being, to run their system, and so forth. Anyhow, they should be dependent either on Israel or Jordan at the end. When it comes to Jerusalem, there is no way to split Jerusalem. Israel should be unified forever. Now again, if we are talking about peace, reconciliation, we can find a way to settle it. Now what I'm saying was actually Prime Minister Rabin's proposal when he brought to the Knesset the second phase of Oslo. It was not 5th of October 1995, a month before his assassination. In his speech in the Knesset, when he asked the Knesset to approve the second phase of Oslo, he said very clearly, the Palestinian entity should be something less than a state. We can't go back to 67 line as his borders or these lines are not defensible. He knew it. He led the IDF in 67, in the Six-Day War, 67. The Jordan Valley should be under Israeli sovereignty in the wider interpretation of the term Jordan Valley. And Jerusalem should be unified forever. That was Rabin in 1995, second phase of Oslo. And I understand it. It's so clear. Now, just talking about security. We have very bad experience with the Palestinian Authority. Any territory which was delivered to their responsibility after Oslo, like Nablus, Ramallah, Jenin, Kalkilia, Tulkarem, and Gaza, had become safe haven for terror and homicide bombers launcher. The whole situation had been changed when we went from the defense to the offense in defensive shield operation. And we, the IDF, and I was proud to lead the operation, dealt with it to defeat the terrorists. Now, to make it again the same mistake, to allow them again to create safe haven for terror, and then we did it unilaterally in the Gaza Strip. As a result of Prime Minister Sharon's conclusion that there is no partner, I rejected it as Chief of Staff because of many reasons. But he decided to do it unilaterally. What did we get instead of land for peace? Land for rockets, thousands of them. With this in mind, can we allow splitting Jerusalem? To allow Palestinian snipers to threaten our civilians? Not talking about mortars, rockets, whatever. Can we allow it? So we can manage to settle the conflict by improving the economy, changing the education, law and order, governance, security. There is no way to make it by withdrawing to 67 line, not talking about splitting Jerusalem. When it comes to the Golan Heights, it's a different issue. It's not between us and the Syrians. Just to think about having the current situation in Syria, and Israel is not deploying in the Golan Heights, it's a nightmare. And, you know, again, the Golan Heights was in the hand of the Syrians 19 years. In our hands, it's more than 40 years now. And security-wise, it's very clear. If we are not on the Golan Heights, again, it's not defensible borders. It will be another temptation to the Syrians or others to attack us. So for the stability in the region, not talking about the security of the State of Israel, we should stay on the Golan Heights.
Ladies and gentlemen, we thank the Vice Premier, the Minister of Strategic Affairs of the State of Israel, Moshe Yaalon. Thank you so much, Moshe. Hamon todah.